Hi and good morning, everyone. Today is a good day. Happy Wednesday, and it's blue skies here in Minnesota, and we're slowly warming up, so that's nice. Makes it easier to get outside and get good exercise and get really good movement. So we're grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. And I hope everybody's finding ways to stay active and healthy during this shelter-in-place time. Today, I'd like to just share some more reflections on the mental side of using and accessing our independent will to bring our creativity, our creative projects and creative ideas into the world. So that's going to be sharing some reflections on two things that are often, in my experience, missed, which are having some kind of daily, weekly, and closing celebration plan for our creative projects, as well as a formal reflection. Sometimes on a weekly basis, and sometimes, and especially at the very end, so we can capture the practical wisdom of experiential learning. And then tomorrow, as I've been reflecting, I'd like to share some ideas on just some practices on how to go from that inspired image to the actual mental planning process, because it doesn't have to go right from an inspired image of something you want to create or the future you see as possible. It doesn't have to go immediately from there right to the plan and then executing the plan. There are some real gentle, soft ways to start to access that artist mulling that we talked about in the creativity posts. There's some intermediate steps that I found helpful, so I want to share those and ways, quite honestly, during a project. We're likely going to have times where we don't feel like doing it. We're going to get blocked, and we're going to have a creative block, or we're going to have a down mood. And then just want to talk about some ways and practices tomorrow on how to unblock ourselves gently without criticizing ourselves, without reprimanding ourselves, without getting down on ourselves. Ways to just work with that gently and make that inner blend with ourselves to get us moving back on track and feeling like we're back in the flow. So that's the trajectory of today, and then tomorrow. So I see Darlene is on. Good morning, Darlene. I see Peter is on. Good morning. Kathy and Henrietta are on. And I see that Jing is on. So awesome. It's great to have everybody here in our virtual circle as we explore our human freedoms that we all have between the stimulus, what happens to us, and our response. And for those of you that haven't been a part of these conversations or these reflections live, we're really cultivating, well, what do we have as human beings as part of our human freedom is we have self-awareness. We have creative imagination. We have our independent will, our capacity to take a stand, swim upstream, cut our own path. And right now we're talking about, how do we cultivate our independent will on the mental side of things. And then the fourth thing is we have our conscience. We can access our sense of right and wrong. Our core values, and we can live by those and we can remember those before we take an action or a response, so that our actions aren't just they aren't just unconscious, they aren't just primal fight or flight responses. They are they're inspired. They're actions that are inspired. They're connected to what we care about, and they consider others. So, in this conversation, we talked about yesterday a little bit more of the conventional aspects of how we mentally exert our independent will and bring our creativity into the world. We talked about setting objectives. I brought in this notion of setting subjectives along with objectives along with subjectives. We talked about the different kinds of goals to set, process goals, performance goals, and outcome goals. And in my written reflection, I just shared a guideline I find helpful, is to have somewhere around a majority of our goals, our process goals, things we have total ability and choice and control over accomplishing. They don't have necessarily a measurable change with them, and that builds our self-confidence. Having about 25% of our goals we set in our project to be measurable relative to our starting point. Those are performance goals. And then finally, our outcome goals, those are where we are competing against some kind of external resistance, either to refine our abilities or to gain interest and make the project more interesting. So, and those are kind of, I think of outcome goals are like the cherry on top. Those are where you're allowing yourself to compare yourself to how someone else is doing, or how you're doing against some other standard, as a way to get that some outside-in feedback, provide some motivation. The challenge with that is most of us, if we're too competitive, when we set our goals, we do it just in the reverse. We spend most of our time with outcome goals, comparison-based goals, and then we have some performance goals, and then we have, if at all, set process goals. So it can be just a constant emotional roller coaster as we're constantly directing our attention out at what others are doing and comparing it to what we're doing. And when we're doing well, we're high, and if we're behind, we're low. And it doesn't provide a lot of consistency with the mental discipline of bringing, first and foremost, bringing our attention into our own actions and our own behavior before allowing our attention to go out and see what the competition is doing. So we want to, in my experience, we want to keep that, think of it like a pyramid. The base of it is just positive behaviors. Then 25% are performance goals, things, us changing relative to our starting point, and then maybe intermittently putting competition or outcome-based goals can actually build us up, regardless of the outcome. So that's what we talked about yesterday. Talked about tasks, having tasks. And I think the last thing I'll say about tasks is once we get into the tasks, the microscopic or granular little tasks that support goals and the objectives, it's very easy to just get into a get or done kind of mentality, where we're just knocking out one task after another. And the key on the creative side is to, as best you can, try to stay connected to the vision. That's why this project planning sheet has a vision board. So, and it has a vision board, the image of future success. I'd have different pictures on here, and then these tasks here that I would, as I'm doing task, T1, I'm looking at this picture, this inspired image of the future. So, and then with practice, you can learn to do that just in your mind's eye with your creative imagination. You can be calling. You can be making a call to purchase an item that you need for your project, while holding the image, the vision in your mind, so that the task becomes wired in your brain. They become wired together, versus just getting a bunch of tasks done and you've completely forgotten about the inspired vision of what you're trying to create. That's a real distinction in the embodied leadership or somatic coaching side of things, when we're doing things but we're not connected to what we care about, or the for sake of what, we're just in movement. When we are taking a small action, completing a task, but in our mind's eye we're connected to the bigger vision, then we say we're in action. We're actually in inspired action. And so on the creative side of things, my hope, my wish is that we all stay in action, taking each task and at least one time remembering, for the sake of what that we're doing it, and what's it really all about, and why it matters to us. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about also having some kind of recognition or celebration plan. This is important because when we're going from an inspired, we're going from our creative imagination and we're going into taking actions in the world. We're really entering the domain of the body, and we need to work actions. We take actions through our body, and so we may have a clear picture in our mind's eye, in our creative mind, about what we're trying to create. And I think the key thing is, maybe a little esoteric, is that our bodies are the domain of action. In other words, we don't take actions outside of our body, and our body is governed by certain biological principles. One of them being understanding how the reward system works neurologically in our brain, especially with our limbic brain, and understanding that we have neurotransmitters that motivate us to receive a reward, and one of those being dopamine, and understanding that the dopamine system motivates us to get a reward. And so if we understand that, no matter what change we're making, if we're making it with our body, if we're working on a creative project or trying to put together a business, we can understand that if we will set out a large reward at the end, some way we're going to recognize and celebrate our accomplishment, as well as weekly, sometimes daily rewards, no matter how small, no matter how tiny, along the way, we can start to skillfully work with our biology so that we can leverage those neurotransmitters to help us keep our motivation high. And so we don't get into that mindset of just grinding things out that we really don't enjoy doing anymore. That goes back to the subjectives. We have objectives, things that we want to measurably change, but what are our conditions of satisfaction of the mental emotional states we want to hold each step along the way? Well, consistently, the three emotional and mental states that I hold myself to on every step along the way on a project are that I can consistently either hold one of these three states: acceptance, enjoyment, and enthusiasm. and I might rotate through those mental emotional states, multiple times in an hour, in a day. But my personal commitment is if I move out of those three and I move into frustration, resentment, then I know something's off. Now I'm trying to achieve something, but I'm creating mental, emotional, psychic pollution within myself and probably with all those people that are around me. I'm not making their life any better. And so that's a moment of pause for me. So having a weekly celebration plan in place, a celebration plan in place at the end of our creative projects can be a way to help work with our biology to keep us in some kind of positive, constructive state. Whatever we've set out as our subjectives, those conditions of satisfaction for mental emotional states. So how I do it is I usually, right away when I start the project, is I put a lot of time into the date of completion and how I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to meet up with some friends. I'm going to go out to a restaurant to celebrate. So I imagine that, where I want to go, what date and time that will be. I do that with my students. When a cohort gets together, one of the first things we talk about in that first week is we talk about graduation, the graduation party, and start planning that in detail so that there's this reward on the horizon and talking about it each step along the way. Then I'll also do that weekly, taking time to do something whenever I reach a milestone of a creative project. Am I going to reward myself with a really nice meal, or am I going to go out and do something really fun and maybe whimsical to just to celebrate the end of a project? Sometimes I'm doing that with other people. Sometimes I'm just doing that solo. But to have those little weekly rewards on those milestones really does, I believe, if we plan those in intentionally into our creative projects, it will help us stay motivated and help us maintain those positive mental emotional states, sometimes on the long road to completion of a major project. So just remember that. Remember that the recognition celebration plan for yourself or people you're working on the project with, put a lot of time and attention into it and plan it in as much detail as the other logistics, because it really will shift your experience of each step along the way. And then the very last thing on the back of my project planning sheets is I always have some form of, and often I'll do this right after the final celebration, is I will do a formal debrief. I've been a part of a lot of debriefs, and there are a lot of different structures to do it. That was a big part of my coaching training, was debriefing every major milestone, so that we're capturing experiential knowledge. In other words, debriefs are teaching us to remember what went well so that we can continue to do that. We remember what were the breakdowns and recognizing what caused them, and then how can we do that differently to avoid that in the future. So we're learning from breakdown. That conflict is generative. And then connecting to new ideas and new goals that came to us from having gone through the process. Things that we could have never thought of back in the imagination stage, we had to actually have the experience before these new ideas could come forward, or these new goals could come forward. And so one of my favorites now is the debrief process is what I call is or the one that I enjoy the most is the one that I've learned from being a volunteer with my son in scouting. The scouts use something called roses, thorns, and buds. And so they just, everything that went well is a rose and it's captured, written down. And then thorns are all those things that were breakdowns, did not go well, and reflecting on what could be done differently in the future to avoid them. And then buds, what are new ideas or new goals that came out of the experience. And those are all, discussed if it's a group activity. And then they're written down and captured. Now, I've done so many of these, I can't even count how many roses, thorns, and buds I've done in so many different areas of my life now. And it seems to me the magic is the actual conversation, and just the process of taking a moment to pause and be reflective and writing them down. I find I often don't ever even need to grab the paper again to look at them. Once I've discussed them, once I've written them down, it just gets locked into memory. And so that process is really powerful because it what I have experienced is it creates this upward spiral of growth. In other words, each time I start another creative project, I have the wisdom, we could say somatically, I have the wisdom at my back of all those previous accomplishments, and the depth of having taken time to reflect on them and capture that experiential knowledge. And then, so it's almost like every time I start a new project, I'm not starting from scratch, I'm starting with the wisdom and the experience of all the previous projects. So that often I've noticed in life, not only the celebration plan, and then taking time to do the formal debrief, and really taking time to debrief it conversationally with those that were part of the experience, and then actually writing them out. That is often missed in many creative projects. It's often missed in business, and not really understood how important that is to the generative process of creativity and experiential learning. So with regard to cultivating our independent will, my encouragement is to develop some kind of reflection process where you debrief and capture everything, the wisdom of everything that you do and that you bring into your life, into your business, into your personal life. It's a really powerful practice. And then there's an optional practice. I do this sometimes with projects, but I'll take the roses, thorns, and buds, and then this is part of formal project planning. I'll write what's called a lessons learned report. So I'll just write out a paragraph or two that writes out a narrative of everything that I learned from the project. I usually do that on larger projects. Don't always do that on smaller projects, but that can be helpful. The last four things that I've committed to memory with regard to the mental side of project planning and independent will is there are four things with traditional project planning that I think are helpful for our creativity and bringing things into reality, which are always remembering the scope of our project to make sure the scope doesn't get too big. I mean, our imaginations can get huge, and sometimes that just if we look at the resources and our abilities, scaling it back is going to be we'll have much more of a chance of success. So getting a scope that's within our resources and abilities, knowing what the critical path is. Some of you have done project planning, you know what I'm talking about. We just want to take a look at all the steps along the way, and some steps are dependent on the completion of previous steps. So we just want to make sure that we don't forget about one step that then holds us back on a future step. So remembering this concept of critical path. On bigger projects that I'm going to delegate or I'm going to have a partner with, I always remember the detail test. And I really like that. I teach that to my son and the Scouts, which is, if you have really planned something well and you're going to delegate it, if it passes the detail test, it's gone from your creative imagination into a written project plan. And the detail test is I can take the written plan and I should be able to hand it over to somebody, and it has so much detail on it that they should be able to basically execute it with just the information on the project planning sheet. And so if I'm going to delegate something, I'll ask myself, can this pass the detail test? If it's just going to be me and I'm not delegating it, and it's a smaller project, then I might not write everything out in that much detail, because there's information that I just embody and know that I don't need to necessarily write it down. But I think it's a good thought tool to go, have I put that much detail into something that I really care about, that I could hand it over to, just hand the sheet over to somebody and they could basically execute the plan because there's that much detail on it. I think back to the Artist's Way conversation we had when we were exploring all the 12 topics in this book. And when I hear the word detail, I always hear the author, and she says, art, creativity is born in attention, and it's brought into this world, or she says it's midwifed into this world through detail. And that phrase has been kind of a mantra, to remember that art is born in our imagination, in our creative imagination through sensory images, and then it's midwifed through detail and planning and attention, as we see it through from imagination into reality. Then the last thing I think is good whenever we're starting to bring our creativity in the world, especially on the mental side of things with project planning, is to avoid activity traps. I mentioned that before on tasks, but I think it's good to have a name for it. And what activity traps are is kind of what I alluded to before. And it has to do, a lot of it has to do with that limbic brain reward system that we have in our biology, is we can get so busy knocking out tasks and such that we get this sense of gratification around accomplishment of tasks, and if we've lost the vision of what we're trying to create that's on our vision board or in our mind's eye, we can get so busy knocking out tasks and receiving that biochemical reward in our brain that pretty soon we're completely off track. So avoiding activity traps when we're working through a project, a creative project, I think is important, and that's why it's important to understand, some basic neuroscience on how and why we're motivated through neurotransmitters, and especially understanding the dopamine pathway, so that doesn't hijack us, and pretty soon we're off just doing things for the sake of the feeling of accomplishing things, and I'm trying to thinking of an orienteering metaphor, like map and compass. Pretty soon we're 40 degrees off of our destination, and that can happen. That honestly can happen. It's happened to me. Maybe it's happened to some of you where you're just knocking things out and you realize this isn't where I'm going. How did I get off on this? So that's just being self-aware. Again, back to self-awareness, and just recognizing that how our biology works, how our motivation system works with our limbic brain, and coming back, keep constantly reminding ourselves, of what we're trying to create, why we're trying to create it, why it matters, and bringing that inspired image back on a regular basis. So I hope this conversation around inspired project planning, as it relates to the mental side of our independent will, I hope that this has made sense, and that I've built a bridge from creativity, the creative imaginative side, this right brain thinking, and working on blending that with that analytical left brain thinking and behavior. I'm hoping that for those of you that have been watching and listening to previous posts, that this is making the blend, and you see the relevance between the creative process as well as that left-brained analytical project planning process, and how they really truly do fit together. There's a beautiful marriage between the two that allow us to consistently bring our creative ideas and projects into this world to completion in the way that we imagine them. So I'm complete there on that topic. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit about ways to transition, small ways to make that transition from our creativity into getting moving with the project planning. There are ways to gently move ourselves into that process so that we're not just driving ourselves too hard. We talked about that's kind of that artist mulling, so I'll talk about that. Practices I found helpful, as well as those practices also are very helpful when we get creatively blocked, because we do. We get stuck. We get our emotions get stuck. We get stuck in an ineffective mood. Life disrupts. Well, how can we gently unblock ourselves on a project that's 3 months, 6 months, a year long? How can we gently unblock ourselves as well without self-criticism and judging ourselves, lashing out at other people because we're frustrated because our progress has been impeded? So there are some practices I'd like to share on how to gently move ourselves back on center, and I'll share those tomorrow. So let's begin our centering practice for today, and just starting with recognizing our mood, and recognizing what mood we're in right now, and meeting that awareness without judgment, attachment, or resistance. Our mood could be happy, distracted, peaceful. It could be frustrated, angry, pissed off, all of those things. Just because we're practicing meditation doesn't mean we can't enter it in a mood that is anything but peaceful. If that's where we're at, that's where we begin. The practice there is just to meet ourselves as we are, and then work from there. So as I feel into my mood, just to share that with all of you, I feel happy, and I feel hopeful. So notice what your mood is. And then let's tap in deeper into more of that subconscious brain, into that area of sensation. So notice what the most dominant sensation is that you're feeling in your body right now in terms of temperature, movement, your felt sense of texture, your felt sense of shape. Notice what the most dominant sensation is in your body. And then let's begin with centering practice. We'll just systematically relax our bodies. So starting with your eyes, so relaxing your eyes. So what we're doing here is we're softening our eyes, opening up our peripheral vision for this moment, just letting go of the focusing of our eyes on detail, taking a soft, larger view, relaxing our jaw, and relaxing the chin, relaxing the muscles of our neck and the muscles that are involved with our voice and our ability to express ourselves. And then let's bring our attention to our shoulders, and you can clench our fists and bring our shoulders up and let that go. And bring your shoulders up and let that go, and feel into your shoulders. Start to open our chest, the muscles, the tension in our chest. You can imagine that opening up like a book. Use that sensory imagery. Open a book, or opening up like a scroll. Or you can imagine, use the imagery of butterfly wings opening up. Whatever image is powerful for you. The imagery is powerful because whatever we start to imagine, we send a low-grade nerve signal to that part of our body, and it starts to, our body starts to match that imagery. They can actually measure that now. When people are doing imagery, they can measure these low-grade nerve signals. So we can relax our diaphragm, that flat breathing muscle. So relaxing the diaphragm and relaxing our belly. One practice we've done in the past is just hands over your belly, and you just create a light vibration around the area of your navel, and that vibration, it's a practice called Shinkan meditation. That vibration starts to create a shaking effect in your body. And we tie that to imagery. The imagery is of sifting sand. So any tension or worries that are in your mind, you're imagining that the vibration is shaking them loose, and they're just kind of shaking down through your body, all the way down through your legs, out through your feet, into the ground. And so they're leaving your body. That's the imagery. And if we open up to that imagery, it can create this effect where some of those negative thoughts or emotions actually start to fade, soften, or disappear. Then bring our attention to our pelvis, our hips. So noticing if there's any tension there. And similar to our shoulders, we can contract and relax there. So you can contract your hip muscles, bring them up and in, and then let go. Take a moment to feel. Bring your pelvis up and in, and let that go. And then relaxing your thighs, fronts and back. Softening your knees, relaxing your calves and shins, relaxing the muscles in your feet and toes. And we're just creating space on a somatic level on our inner body. Start to breathe into that space. Start to expand your breath a bit. Cultivating that self-awareness. And then let's start to center in, first of all, our felt sense of length from top to bottom. So I'm going to center here, standing or seated. So we're starting to align our body around and organize our body around our vertical line. We're straightening, and at the same time we're settling. Once we align the weight of our body, we can start to feel the weight of our body starts to rest on our bones. And that's important because that gives us a felt sense of effortlessness. To tie that a little bit to our conversation on creativity and project planning, that's where the self-awareness piece comes in. If I'm working on my project and I notice I'm starting to close down my vertical line, I'm starting to get weighed down, and I'm starting to no longer enjoy the process of the steps of my plan, my creative plan, I'll just recenter myself. I bring in self-awareness, recenter myself, stop that burdening and that collapsing in my vertical line can sometimes shift my mood and emotions and shift my thinking. Just to bring some relevance there to the mental, how our bodies are connected to our minds. And then let's, with our imagination and our attention, take a deep breath in through the crown of your head. Pull that breath through, exhale out through your feet and hands. Then take a deep breath in through your feet and hands. And exhale out through the crown of your head. One more time, deep breath in through the crown of your head. Pull that breath through, exhale out through your feet and hands. And take a moment to feel yourself centered in your length, in your vertical line. We're feeling ourselves in our felt sense of our dignity, our power, that we can influence this world. And we're feeling ourselves as a bridge between heaven and earth. We're creating that connection between our spirituality and our physicality. This felt sense in our body that we can have a spiritual vision or a creative vision, and while at the same time being fully connected and grounded in the practical side and connected to the earth. Another way to say that is we can have a creative or a spiritual vision and the ability to take actions that are in line with that vision to bring that vision to life. Let's bring our attention to our width from left to right. And you can just start to kind of rock side to side, find that balance point. Our width is our balance between self and others on the somatic side. And we'll start with bringing attention to our commitment to ourselves. So left hand on chest and right hand on our belly. This can be a symbol of a self-embrace. Bringing attention to the ways that we're taking care of ourselves, feeling our personal boundaries, what we're saying yes to, what we're saying no to, who we take on as our partners, who we decide not to, and bringing attention and remembering to plan in and set aside time to cultivate and develop ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. And then start to extend our arms out. Start to open up our chest, starting to extend out, start to bring maybe somebody that's in your home into your field of awareness. So you're still feeling yourself. You're starting to bring your attention, extend it out to them. And then maybe extend out to some other living thing in nature. Like I see that tree that I often see each morning. I'm including that in my field of awareness. So I'm including nature. And maybe even including, some of you may have a four-legged, a kitty or a dog. Just including and extending to them. And then using our imagination, extending to everybody that's on this live post this morning. So as to model that, I'm imagining Henrietta and Kathy and Jing and Peter and Clayton and Krista and Victoria and Jen. I'm imagining you all standing here or seated here in a circle with me, as though we're doing this meditation live. When I allow my imagination to go there, it shifts my mood. It creates this palpable sense that you're here, and that's powerful. And then let's reach out a little further, a bigger reach, and let's try to include an enemy, an opponent, someone who's betrayed us. Try to extend love and compassion to them. Still can feel the healthy boundary we may still have with them, and at the same time extending out love and compassion to them, that they're a human being, they have dignity. Try to connect to our commonality. They have talents, we have talents. They've suffered, we've suffered. They have hopes and dreams, we have hopes and dreams. Let's take a deep breath in through our left hand with our imagination, our attention. Take a deep breath in. Pull that breath through, exhale out through your right. And then a deep breath in from our right hand. Pull that breath through the center of our body. And exhale out our left. One more time, deep breath in through our left hand. Pull that breath through the center of our body. Exhale out our right. And then take a moment to feel. You can relax your arms. Still feel yourself open in your width, your somatic width. And then let's begin by centering in our depth, our felt sense of our depth, and feeling our future in the space in front of us, and imagining our history at our back. Just you can start to lean back, feel your past, and lean forward, feel your future, where you're headed. At our back, we can feel the wisdom of our experiences, our teachers, our competencies, our talents. Our lineage. As we lean forward, we start to connect to our inspired visions, things we're inspired to bring into this world. Our yearnings and longings for personal growth and change. And our felt sense of purpose, what we're being called to do. Who are we becoming? We can also connect into our back here and lean back, and we can become aware of what part of our character or our personality that has been developed and really is a deep part of who we are, but we can also feel into parts of our personality that are no longer useful. In other words, they got us here, but they're holding us back from who we're becoming. And we can also feel that at our back and imagine what is it, and ask ourselves, what is it that, what part of ourselves do we need to let go and set down and stop practicing, so we can make some space for new beliefs, new character qualities, new thoughts that are going to help us move forward and more fully into who we're longing to become. Sometimes that's a tough question. It's hard to entertain letting go of parts of our personality that have been along with us a long time and have served us very well. So just invite you to be in that question. Is there a part of yourself you need to set down in order so that you can move forward? Then let's center ourselves, finding an effortless posture here, poised between the space in front of us, the space behind us, and allowing that effortlessness in sitting here, that felt sense, to be the felt sense of the present moment, the only moment that ever really is, and feeling ourselves from the inside out. Invite you, with your imagination, your attention, take a deep breath in from the space behind you. Take a deep breath in. Exhale out into the space in front of you. And then again, take a deep breath in about 10 feet in front of you. Imagine that as your future. Pull that breath through your body. Exhale out into your past. Then one more time, breathing in your past, if you will. Pull that breath through your body, exhaling out into your future. And take a moment to feel yourself centered in your depth. Centered and in right relationship to past and future. Connected to your past, gaining strength from your past, but you're not living there. Connected to a future vision, a longing where you're headed as a compass, providing direction, but you're not living there. You're cultivating all our presence, all our power into this moment, the only moment that ever really is. Let's take our right hand, place it below our navel. As we feel our hand on our belly, we feel the temperature of our hand, feel the shape of our hand. Allow that to help us go even further out of the thinking self and dropping further into the feeling, intuitive, bodily self. Let's take 3 deep breaths together. So a deep breath into our center. And a second breath, a deep breath into our felt sense of purpose. And a third breath, a deep breath into the mystery. Take a moment to feel. Invite you to close your eyes as we begin to enter our meditation for this morning. And as we enter that inner space, remind yourself, for the sake of what, that you're doing this meditation practice. Tie the practice to an intention, something you care about. As you connect to your intention, also become aware that you're here in community. There are others in this practice with you. And feel the support of that. My body, you are an animal whose appropriate behavior is concentration and discipline. An effort of an athlete, of a saint, and of a yogi. Well trained, you will become for me a gate through which I leave myself, and a gate through which I enter myself. A plumb line to the center of the earth, and a cosmic ship to Jupiter. My body, you are an animal for whom ambition is right. Splendid possibilities are open to us. My body, you are an animal whose appropriate behavior is concentration and discipline. An effort of an athlete, of a saint, and of a yogi. Well trained, you will become for me a gate through which I leave myself, and a gate through which I enter myself. A plumb line to the center of the earth, and a cosmic ship to Jupiter. My body, you are an animal for whom ambition is right. Splendid possibilities are open to us. And as we close our practice today, remind yourself again, for the sake of what? And then very slowly and very gently begin to move your arms and legs. And very slowly and very gently begin to open your eyes and let the outside world come back in again. Take a moment to become aware of your mood. Notice maybe the most dominant sensation you're feeling right now in your body. And notice the thoughts that you're thinking, and if those thoughts have shifted, your mood has shifted, your felt sense of sensation has shifted. So thank you for sharing the time this morning. I'm grateful and I'm touched to have this online and virtual community each morning. It's hard to believe that it's almost been a month, and that we're cultivating something very important, and that is our inner freedom. Tomorrow we'll just start to explore real subtle transitionary practices we can do mentally, emotionally, that can help us smoothly transition from our inspired image, whatever it is has come to us to create, and how can we do that in a real gentle, smooth way. Some practices, and those same practices often are the practices that can help us gently unstick ourselves whenever we get creatively blocked or we get stuck in a negative emotion or a mood. And I'll share with you those practices, as well as just my experience and some of my stories on how it's played out in my life. So wishing you all a day of intention, of bringing your creativity into the world, both through achievement and through holding positive mental, emotional states. And again, just bringing back that original quote that was the inspiration of these virtual meditations, which is from Viktor Frankl, that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space lies our ability, yours and my ability, to choose our response. And it is in those choices, our choices, that lie our growth and our freedom. And bye for now, and we'll see you tomorrow.